The morning Forbes named Victor Aldane the most influential man in biotech. His son stopped speaking. Not metaphorically, not the sullen silence of a teenager who'd rather be anywhere else. Nolan, 11 years old, gap-toothed, obsessed with drawing sea creatures in the margins of every notebook he owned, simply stopped, mid-sentence, at the breakfast table, reaching for the orange juice. One moment he was saying something about a hammerhead shark, and then his hand missed the glass entirely, knocked it sideways, and he looked at his father with an expression Victor had never seen on any face before. Confused and very far away, both at once, the orange juice spread across the white marble floor like something being lost. That was 8 months ago. Victor had built Aldane Biosciences from a rented garage in Raleigh to a company worth $4 billion. He understood systems. He understood failure points. When something broke in his labs, you found the mechanism, isolated the variable, corrected the course. He had applied this logic to every problem in his life. His divorce from Nolan's mother. When Nolan was 3, the SEC investigation in 2019, the supply chain collapse that nearly killed the company in 21. Every problem had a pressure point. You found it, you pressed, the problem yielded. He could not find the pressure point in his son. The neurologists at Duke used a term, acquired pediatric aphasia, with dissociative episodes, APIDAID, that sounded precise until Victor spent 3 nights reading every paper ever published on it and realized the precision was cosmetic. Nobody knew what caused it. Nobody knew why some children plateaued and why others declined. There were treatment protocols. Victor had funded 2 of them personally, quietly, after Nolan's diagnosis, funneling money through a foundation so no one would speculate about his motivations or his company's stock price. He was not ashamed of this. He was practical. The treatments had not worked. Dr. Renfield, chief of pediatric neurology at Duke, calm in the way that expensive doctors learn to be calm, which is to say practiced rather than felt, had sat across from Victor in a conference room in February and told him, gently, that they had reached the edge of what current evidence supported. Nolan was stable, which was the good news. He was also static. He communicated with a small whiteboard, block letters that he printed carefully, and he could dress himself and eat and follow a routine, but the boy who used to recite the Latin names of shark species at the dinner table was somewhere Victor could not reach. There are excellent residential facilities, Dr. Renfield had said. Places that specialize in long-term pediatric neurological care, structured environments, consistent staff. For a child in Nolan's situation, he's not a situation, Victor said. Renfield nodded in the way people nod when they want to move past something uncomfortable.
Of course not.
Victor had driven home in silence, all the way from Durham to the lake house in Creedmoor, where he'd moved them after the diagnosis, away from the city, away from the investors who watched his face for signs of distraction, away from everything. He sat in the driveway for 20 minutes before going inside. Through the window he could see Nolan at the kitchen table, drawing, always drawing. Whatever had taken his words had left his hands alone. The lake house had a dock, and Nolan liked to sit at the end of it in the mornings, with his feet dangling above the water. Victor had learned to sit beside him without expectation. This was harder than it sounded. Victor was a man who had spent his entire adult life converting silence into outcomes, calls that closed deals, pauses that shifted negotiations. Sitting beside his son and simply being, not fixing, not strategizing, not measuring. This required a daily act of will that left him exhausted in ways that 18-hour days in the lab never had. One Tuesday in late April, a woman appeared on the far side of the lake road. Victor noticed her the way you notice anything at the periphery of a place you've decided is private, with mild irritation. She was old, maybe 70, maybe older, moving slowly along the unpaved shoulder with a canvas bag over one arm. Behind her, keeping pace with the careful attention of a child who has learned to watch for hazards, was a boy. He looked about 10, small for his age, with the kind of thin face that comes not from illness, but from not quite enough of things. Enough food, enough warmth, enough winter coat. He was wearing a jacket 2 sizes too big that might have come from a donation bin, and he was watching the old woman's feet the way a nurse watches a monitor. Victor didn't think anything in particular about either of them. Then Nolan lifted his hand. It wasn't a wave exactly. It was the slight elevation of a palm, the tiniest acknowledgement, and it was directed entirely at the boy across the road. Victor went very still, Nolan had not voluntarily acknowledged a stranger in 4 months. The boy, after a moment, raised his hand back. Her name was Cecilia Voss. The boy was her grandson, Jasper. Victor learned this the following Thursday, when he walked down to the road with 2 cups of coffee and stood there feeling slightly absurd until they came by again, which they did at exactly the same time, with the same quiet regularity of people who have organized their lives around small, reliable things. Cecilia accepted the coffee with the directness of a woman who had never had time for false modesty about receiving things she needed. She was from eastern North Carolina originally, she said, but had lived in the lake community for 30 years, in one of the small houses on the far side of the water. The ones with the chain-link fences and the vegetable gardens and the boats that actually got used. Her daughter, Jasper's mother, was working 2 jobs in Fayetteville and sent money when she could, and Jasper stayed with Cecilia during the school week because the school on this side was better than the one near his mother's apartment. "And you're the man who bought the Hargrove place," Cecilia said, nodding toward Victor's house with no particular judgment in it. "The one from the news, probably," Victor said. "Your boy doesn't talk." "No." She considered this. Jasper had drifted toward the dock where Nolan still sat, hands in his jacket pockets, that suggested he understood boundaries without anyone having explained them. "Does he draw?" Cecilia asked. "Every day. Jasper draws too," she said. "See things, mostly." Victor looked at her. "What did you say?" "Oceans, fish, whatever he sees on nature programs." She shrugged. "His mother says he's going to be a marine biologist or broke, one or the other." Down at the dock, Jasper had sat down, not close to Nolan, several feet away, looking at the water with the same posture Nolan had. 2 boys looking at the same lake from a respectful distance. Nolan was reaching into his jacket pocket for his notebook. Victor told himself it was nothing. Children sat near each other. It meant nothing specific. He was a scientist. He understood the error of reading causation into proximity. But the following Monday, he found Nolan at the window at 7:15, already dressed, watching the road. He didn't write anything on his board. He just stood at the window. Jasper and Cecilia came by at 7:40. When Victor opened the door and looked at his son, Nolan was already moving toward his shoes. They walked down to the dock together, the 4 of them, and Victor and Cecilia sat at the picnic table near the water with their coffee, while the 2 boys settled at the end of the dock. Jasper pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket, a drawing of something, a ray of some kind, and laid it flat on the dock boards. Nolan looked at it for a long time. Then he opened his notebook to a page and held it up. A shark, detailed and careful, every fin exactly placed. Jasper grinned. It was the sudden, uncomplicated grin of a child who has found the right frequencies. Something happened in Victor's chest that he could not have named or quantified or run through any system he'd ever built. He called Renfield that evening. "There's a kid," Victor said. "A boy, 10, 11. He and Nolan have started, I don't know what to call it, communicating in some way. Through drawings." "That's good," Renfield said carefully. "Social engagement is, he's responding to this child in ways he doesn't respond to the occupational therapist or the speech pathologist or me." Victor paused. "I want to know what that means." There was a silence on the line that Victor recognized as clinical caution dressed up as thoughtfulness. Children with APAID sometimes form selective bonds, a particular voice, a particular face, a particular... I'm not asking for a categorization. I'm asking what it means for treatment. Victor. Renfield's voice was kind, and Victor had learned to distrust kindness in doctors' voices because it usually preceded limitation. "We don't have a treatment protocol that involves peer social bonding as a primary modality. There's no evidence base for." "Then we build one," Victor said. He stopped himself. He pressed his hand flat against the kitchen counter and breathed. "I'm sorry. I understand what you're saying. I'm watching my son sit at a window at 7 in the morning waiting for this boy to walk by. In 8 months, I have not seen him wait for anything." Renfield was quiet. "I know it's probably nothing," Victor said, though he didn't believe it. "It's not nothing," Renfield said, finally, slowly. "It's not a cure, but it's engagement, and engagement it's something to work with. Let it develop naturally. Don't orchestrate it. Just let them be." They let them be. April became May. The mornings on the dock became a fixed point in the week, and then in the day, and Victor restructured his entire schedule around them with an efficiency that would have surprised anyone who'd ever sat across a negotiating table from him. Calls moved, meetings condensed. His assistant, Rebecca, who had worked for him for 11 years and long since stopped being surprised by anything he did, simply updated the calendar without comment. What happened on the dock was not dramatic. That was what struck Victor each time he watched from the picnic table. It was quietly, systematically remarkable. Jasper would bring drawings, oceans, creatures, coastlines drawn in the heavy, confident lines of a child who has a calling before he has a word for it, and Nolan would respond with his own, and from there they would construct entire conversations in images that Victor couldn't fully read, but Cecilia occasionally translated, with the unhurried accuracy of someone who has spent a lifetime watching children communicate in ways adults keep forgetting are valid. "He's asking where the other one goes in winter," she said one morning, squinting at Nolan's latest drawing. A fish, arrows indicating migration. "How do you know?" Victor asked. She gave him the look she reserved for questions she considered to be obvious. "Because Jasper drew it going south 2 weeks ago, and your boy has been drawing the same fish since, working out the route." Victor looked at his son, bent over the dock boards, correcting a line in his notebook with the focused intensity he'd once used on shark taxonomy reports. "He's reasoning," Victor said, mostly to himself. "Children usually are," Cecilia said. "We just don't always give them the right material to reason with." In June, Jasper started humming. It wasn't planned. It was just something he did when he was concentrating. A low, shapeless sound, a vibration more than a melody. Victor noticed it first on a Wednesday, and then realized it had probably been happening for weeks. What he noticed that Wednesday specifically was that when Jasper hummed, Nolan went very still in a different way than his usual stillness. Not withdrawn, alert. He mentioned it to Cecilia. She set her coffee cup down and looked at him with an expression he couldn't immediately read. "My daughter used to sing to him," she said, "when he was small. Before things got complicated, she'd sing while she cooked. Everything she cooked." A pause. "He used to ask her to sing even when she wasn't cooking, just to have it in the room." Victor waited. Then things got hard and she stopped singing. Cecilia picked up her cup again. Children remember that kind of thing. What filled a room when they were safe? That evening, Victor sat at the kitchen table where Nolan was drawing and put on, very quietly, an old playlist he'd never personally curated, one that had been a gift from his own mother years ago, folk songs and hymns, and the kind of simple melodic structures that didn't require anything from the listener. He put it on low and made dinner and didn't say a word about it. Nolan looked up once, toward the speaker. Then he went back to drawing, but his pencil, for the rest of the evening, moved in the rhythm of the music. It was Cecilia who first said the word that changed things. She said it the way she said most things, directly, without preamble, without checking whether Victor was ready. "Acupressure," she said on a morning in late June, while Jasper and Nolan were down at the dock. "My mother used it on me when I had cluster headaches as a girl. Different points, nothing medical, nothing you'd see in a hospital. Things passed down, the way things used to get passed down." She looked at her hands. "There are points on the hands and the base of the skull that are supposed to affect, I don't even know the right word for it now, speech, cognition. I'm not a doctor. I don't want you to think I'm telling you to do anything." Victor looked at her steadily. "What are you telling me?" "I'm telling you what my mother knew, and her mother before her." She met his eyes. "I'm telling you that Jasper asks me sometimes why the boy doesn't talk, and I tell him some things are locked up, and sometimes you have to find the right key. And Jasper asked me yesterday if I knew where to look." She was quiet. My mother would have known exactly where to look. Victor said nothing for a moment. He was aware, with the part of his mind that was always and permanently a scientist, that there was no peer-reviewed literature robustly supporting cranial acupressure as a treatment for acquired pediatric aphasia. He was also aware, with a different part of his mind, the part that had been watching his son wait at a window every morning for 6 weeks, that the peer-reviewed literature had also told him his son would not engage spontaneously with anyone, would not communicate non-verbally with a peer, would not respond to auditory stimuli in a way suggesting comprehension. The peer-reviewed literature, in other words, did not fully know his son. "Would you show me?" he asked. Cecilia's hands were careful and deliberate, and she explained each point the way a craftsperson explains a technique, not with the authority of theory, but with the authority of long practice. The base of the thumb, applied gently, sustained. The soft spot below the occiput where the skull meets the neck. The center of the palm, circular pressure, patient and slow. She had Victor practice on his own hand until she was satisfied he had the weight right. Not too firm, not tentative. Firm in the way that says I am here without saying I need something from you. You have to do it when he's calm, she said, not distracted. When the water's quiet and the birds aren't making noise, and he's already soft, you'll know the moment. How? She smiled for the first time since Victor had known her, a small, genuine thing. You're his father, you'll know. The first time Victor tried it, Nolan let him, which Victor had not taken for granted. He sat behind his son on the dock on a Thursday morning, when Jasper and Cecilia had gone home, and the lake was absolutely still, and he placed his hands the way Cecilia had shown him, and he held the points gently, and he did not say anything or expect anything. Nolan's shoulders dropped about a quarter inch. That was all, the first time. But Victor understood the language of small movements now in a way he hadn't 8 months ago, and a quarter inch was a long distance. He still called Renfield. He was not a man who abandoned evidence or process. He had not become what he was by trusting feeling over data. He described what he and Cecilia were doing in precise, careful terms, and Renfield listened without interruption, which was either professional courtesy or genuine interest. Victor could not tell which. The auditory stimulation has some documentation, Renfield said when he finished. There's decent work on rhythmic entrainment in pediatric patients with neurological disruption. The acupressure is. The evidence is thin, but it's not zero. And more importantly, if he's tolerating it and relaxing during it, the parasympathetic activation alone could be. I'm not asking for your blessing, Victor said. Then, more quietly, I'm asking if you think we're doing harm. No, Renfield said without hesitation. You're not doing harm, you're doing the opposite of harm. A pause. Keep going. July. Something was shifting, the way ground shifts before you see the topography change. Felt before observed. Movement you can't prove until the evidence accumulates into certainty. Nolan began bringing 2 notebooks to the dock, one for drawing, one that he'd started using differently. Not images, but something between image and language, hybrid symbols that seemed to have meaning he hadn't taught himself from anywhere Victor could identify. Jasper learned them with the speed of a child who has never been told that communication is supposed to look one specific way. One afternoon, Victor came down to call them in for lunch and found them having an argument. Not a distressing one. A genuine, animated disagreement about something in one of Nolan's notebooks, Jasper shaking his head emphatically. Nolan crossing something out and redrawing it, Jasper pointing at the water, and then back at the page with the righteous certainty of a child who knows the actual answer. Victor stood at the edge of the dock and felt something that would have been funny under different circumstances, because it was so completely ordinary. The mild exasperation of a parent whose kid is arguing with a friend and is going to be late for lunch. Whatever you're disagreeing about, Victor said, you can finish it after sandwiches. Jasper looked up. He says the bull shark can't go more than 50 miles upriver, and I know for a fact, after sandwiches, Victor said. Jasper grumbled and got up. Nolan got up too, and as he passed Victor on the dock, he tugged once on his father's sleeve. A quick, deliberate pull, the gesture of a child asking to be followed. Victor followed. The nights were harder. The nights had always been harder, and they remained harder, because the progress, and it was progress, slow and unmappable, and sometimes impossible to distinguish from hope, was not linear. There were mornings when Nolan sat on the dock and did not draw, and did not respond when Jasper showed him things, and just looked at the water, with the specific blankness that Victor had learned to recognize as the deep place his son went sometimes, the place no one had found a door into yet. On those mornings, Jasper simply sat with him, did not perform cheerfulness, did not try to reach him, just sat, close enough that their jackets almost touched, looking at the same water. Victor watched this from the picnic table and felt something he couldn't categorize scientifically, which was perhaps why it felt significant. The sight of this small, thin boy in his too large jacket choosing, without instruction, to meet his son exactly where his son was, without trying to move him anywhere. Cecilia on one of those mornings said quietly, "His mother does this for him too. When things are hard, She just sits. Victor didn't say anything. That's what love looks like when it's got nothing to prove, she said. It happened on a Saturday in August. Victor had been in the kitchen making coffee, half listening to the morning sounds of the lake, the birds, the water, Jasper's occasional humming drifting up from the dock, when the humming stopped. He didn't notice right away. Then the absence of it registered, and he looked out the window. Both boys were still on the dock. Nolan had his hand raised, not the small partial gesture he sometimes made, but his whole arm pointing at something on the water. A heron, Victor saw, standing at the shallows 30 feet out, absolutely still, watching them. And then Nolan said, out loud, to no one, and everyone and the heron and his father, who was standing frozen at the kitchen window with a coffee cup in his hand, "It's waiting." 2 words, rough at the edges, imprecise in the way of a voice that hadn't been used in a long time, the way a room sounds when you open it after winter. But words. Real ones, with intention behind them, aimed at the world. Jasper turned to look at him. His face went through several things very quickly. Then he pointed at the heron too and said, with the absolute gravity of a child confirming something important, "That's what they do. They wait as long as it takes." The heron lifted from the water and was gone. Victor set down the coffee cup on the counter very carefully, because his hands were not entirely steady, and walked to the back door and stood in the doorway with the morning air coming at him, and looked at his son, who was still looking at the place where the heron had been. "Nolan," he said. His son turned around, looked at his father across the distance of the yard and the dock, and 8 months of silence. "Hi, Dad," he said. It was not a resolution in the way that resolutions happened in the stories Victor had read as a child, where a moment of healing closes the door completely on the hard thing. Renfield was clear about this at the next appointment, which Victor attended with a feeling closer to gratitude than hope, which was a change. Ape didn't simply conclude. There would be harder days. There would be regression, possibly, and therapies they hadn't tried, and adjustments to adjust. The brain was not a system you debugged once and updated. But there were words now, more of them every week, adding themselves back into Nolan's life, the way light adds itself back in spring. Not all at once, gradually, and then one day you look up and it's just there. Jasper was there for most of the words. It seemed right that he should be. In September, when school started, Victor contacted Jasper's mother, Donna, Cecilia's daughter, tired in the way of someone who has been running at a deficit for years and knows it, and made an arrangement. Not charity. A job, real work he'd been meaning to hire for. Part-time grounds management at the lake property, with a salary that reflected what it was actually worth, and a schedule built around Donna's existing jobs rather than against them. Jasper and Nolan would be at the same school. Cecilia had an account Victor set up for what he called household support and what she called unnecessary, though she accepted it. He knew she knew what it really was. He didn't try to rename it. On the last morning of summer before school began, the 4 of them sat at the end of the dock, Victor, Cecilia, Nolan, Jasper. With the sun coming across the water at the angle it only hits in September, everything golden and faintly ending. Nolan had his notebook. Jasper was humming something without melody. "What do you want to be?" Jasper asked Nolan, out of nowhere, with the ease of someone asking a question he's held for a while and has finally decided to release. Nolan was quiet for a moment. He looked at the water. Then he looked at his notebook, at the years of sharks and rays and things with Latin names that nobody else in his class had ever heard of. "A scientist," he said, "the kind that studies what's underneath." Jasper considered this seriously. "Oceanographer. Yeah," Nolan said. "That one." Victor looked out at the lake and didn't say anything, because there was nothing he could add to that, and he was learning, slowly, at the cost of 8 months of everything, that this was sometimes its own form of wisdom. The water caught the light. Both boys were drawing.